Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us in this Lounge and Learn session. Be in the know, give RTI a go. We are very excited to have you here this evening. This is a special free session that we are offering to help spread the word about all that Lounge and Learn has to offer. My name is Tiffany Clymer, and I work with Encompassing Education. Our goal with our Lounge and Learn sessions is to provide 1 hour professional development in bite-sized amounts so that you can take what you have learned and immediately apply that to what you have going on in your district, your school, your classroom. Just enough information for you to immediately take that and start working on presenting and implementing these new tips and strategies with your students. So tonight we are going to start focusing on all things that are related to RTI. Hello, like I said, my name is Tiffany Clymer. A little bit of background information for you. I started out in the classroom about 10 years ago teaching remedial 8th grade math, then taught kindergarten for 2 years, which was not drastically different. During that second year of teaching kindergarten, I received state training in RTI for about 40 plus hours of training. This is when I received all of the information that I fell in love with when it came to RTI. I took that back and started implementing that in my K-6 building. I taught 5th grade during that time period, 6th grade, and then also I did a year of intervention in my K-6 building while also getting RTI up and going. I then was moved into an instructional coach position at our 5 through 8 building in my district, and I took the RTI system that we had in place at K-6. We kind of transitioned that a little bit to meet the needs of our 5 through 8 building and got RTI up and going there as well. So I understand for those of you that are working to implement a sound RTI system, I've been there. So hopefully after our time tonight, you will have some information that you can take and immediately apply to what you have going on with your RTI system in your building as well. So hold tight, we're going to go ahead and get started. A few things before we get going this evening. In an effort to minimize the background noise, you all have been muted. So be sure to utilize that chat box if you have any questions, or raise your hand with the little hand icon during the training if you happen to have any questions. At this point, since this session is being recorded, feel free to email us at encompassingeducation.com. That's Tiffany at encompassingeducation.com, or Diane at encompassingeducation.com, and we will be more than happy to address those concerns at that time. We will be offering PGPs for this session. If you attend this session and fill out the feedback survey that will come up at the end of the session, you're going to get 2 PGP points. If, however, you would like to get a few more, you can get 5 PGP points by completing 1 additional follow-up application that we will discuss later in our session. And those deliverables can be emailed to Diane at encompassingeducation.com within 3 days so that she can get that information to you. At the end of our training session, we do ask that you not just completely close out your web browser, as we would like for you to complete that end of session feedback survey so that we can get some information from you. We truly value this feedback, and we utilize that to make our Lounge and Learn sessions as effective as possible, because we know that your time is very valuable and we want to make sure that you're getting the most out of this experience as possible. So please make sure you complete that feedback survey at the end of our session today. It is not necessary for you to take any notes during this session because a copy of the PowerPoint is going to be provided to you at the end of the session. But if there are any additional comments that you want to take note of, feel free. I myself am a note taker, so you can just sit back, relax, and lounge and learn with us tonight. And what's great about Lounge and Learn sessions is you can participate in these from anywhere. So pick your favorite spot, hide from your children like I am currently doing right now, and enjoy our session. At the end of our session today, participants will have developed a deeper understanding of all of the components that create an effective and successful RTI system. You will also understand the role and the value of an RTI school task force and how that figures into the implementation process. Finally, you'll develop a much better understanding of the 3 keys to successful RTI implementation that can get you, help you hit the ground running with RTI implementation in your district or building. Now, the goal of RTI is to catch struggling students early in order to provide appropriate instruction based on grade level standards. This is not something that's new. This is what teachers have been doing for as long as teachers have been around. Finding students that are struggling, providing them with these additional strategies to help them demonstrate grade level mastery. Now I want you to take a moment right now and jot down kind of what your initial thoughts are about RTI. Maybe it's where you are with RTI implementation. Maybe jot down a couple of questions that you might have about RTI and questions that maybe you have in particular. So go ahead and pause the recording, and I would like for you to take a moment to go ahead and do that now. All right, thank you. What I would like for you to do is, as you have watched this free session, please visit our Facebook page at Encompassing Ed, and I want you to go ahead and post your responses at the end of the session today. Let us know that you were a participant in our free session on RTI, and then you're going to document these chat around spots on that Facebook page for us so that I can provide you with some individualized feedback since the session is not live this evening. Okay, so we're going to jump right in. What is RTI? RTI is that Total School Initiative. It's a 3-tiered system of best professional practices. These are not new concepts. These are just best professional practices that teachers have been utilizing forever. It has roots that go all the way back to that Education for All Handicapped Children Act in 1975, and more recently you will find it in the verbiage of IDEA 2004, where it lists that RTI is a system that can be implemented to help you identify those students that are in need of additional support with an individualized education plan through special education services. So it's a whole school initiative where everybody has a specific job that they can be doing. This includes everyone from your custodian to your office staff to your PE teachers. We're all in the same boat together moving forward and supporting our struggling students. So that's great, but what does that really mean? Well, what the idea was with RTI is that we were moving away from that wait to fail mindset, where students really were struggling a little bit, but they weren't far enough behind for that to lead us to some additional educational evaluation to determine those appropriate next steps. This was more of a proactive educational model that included the early identification of at-risk students, early intervening strategies provided for those kiddos, utilizing those research-based interventions and supports to do that. And you're going to hear me say this multiple times, that the #1 focus of a strong and effective RTI system is high-quality classroom instruction for all students at Tier 1. If you do not have sound instruction at Tier 1, your RTI efforts at Tier 2 and Tier 3 are really dead in the water before you even get started. So what is RTI? Well, again, it's that multi-tiered approach to early identification and support for your students, that total school initiative. No one is exempt from this. Every person in your building has a role to play in your RTI system. It's nothing new with RTI because it's that framework of best professional practices that teachers have been utilizing for years. And it can also provide a solution to the ballooning enrollment in special education. I know that this is a concern that I have heard from multiple schools, is that we have so many students that are qualifying for special education services, and we don't have the personnel or the resources to be able to meet the needs of all of those students that have been identified through special education services. So what RTI can do is it can identify those students very early and bring them back up to grade level mastery, filling those gaps along the way before a special education evaluation is even a consideration. So what RTI isn't, it is not a special education initiative, but it's also not a gen ed initiative. It's a system that you can put in place to identify where your students are, meet them at that particular need, and then provide them with those additional supports that they need in order to demonstrate mastery of grade level standards. It is not mandated at the national level. Again, it is something that you, through IDEA, you can utilize to help you identify those students that truly do need additional support with special education services. And RTI most definitely is not a one-size-fits-all approach to improving overall student achievement. It's just like with anything in the classroom. All of our students learn in different ways. They learn at different rates. And we have to be very mindful of that as we are providing additional support through an RTI system. The one-size-fits-all approach is not going to cut it at this stage with our kiddos. Okay, so why do we choose it? Well, first of all, it works. I've seen it work. I've been a part of this movement that is an RTI system. When everyone in your building is on board, moving towards the same goals, huge things happen with our students. As I've worked in schools with teachers, the teachers get really excited as they start to see the students experiencing success through the provided interventions. And then once that group of students is experiencing that, the teachers are talking to other teachers, and then it just kind of is this snowball effect. It really, truly works, and it's a very powerful thing to be able to be a part of. It also reduces that disproportionality that sometimes we see through the identification of students for special education services, where certain demographics of students are kind of overrepresented in our special ed population. And RTI can help with that again, because remember, we're identifying those students early, picking out those very specific needs that they have, and providing them with that immediate intervention and support. And so it can help students that historically perhaps had been taken through all of the steps and gone through testing for an educational evaluation. They don't even need to get to that point because we've already identified and filled that gap before we get there. It can also help to reduce that over-identification of students. I've worked in buildings where simply if a child participated in Tier 2 or Tier 3 intervention, they automatically then qualified for an IEP. Holy cow, a couple of years after that, then the school said, oh my gosh, we have so many kids in special ed. How did that happen? Well, if you truly have a sound RTI system in place, you're going to have checks and balances built into what you're doing to make sure that you are not over-identifying kids. You are going to be utilizing the data that you collect and going through the documentation that you have on these students so that you can make sure that there is not an over-identification of students happening within your RTI system. One of the things that I love the most about an RTI system is that it empowers teachers. This is a biggie because guess what, teachers? Now you are being given the opportunity to use the data that you have collected for your students and make those sound educational decisions based upon the data for your students. You know your students better than anyone else, and you're going to combine that knowledge that you have as a teacher, that natural ability to know where they are, combining that with the data that you have collected to really make some sound educational decisions for your students. This is where you get to incorporate some more of those creative presentation ideas with your kiddos. If they didn't get it the first time that you presented it, throwing a creative spin on that second presentation or introduction of a concept to students might be just the thing that they need to get it, for that light bulb to switch on and that aha moment to happen. So it really is a powerful experience for teachers. To piggyback on that, it's also very powerful school reform. When I talked earlier about how everyone is on board, that whole school initiative, this is a movement. And a story to kind of highlight this a little bit, I was working in a building and I had two teachers that came in and they said, oh my gosh, I just heard so-and-so and so-and-so, who happened to be little squirrels at school that really were often in trouble and visiting the principal's office. And they overheard a conversation with them at lunch talking about how they both did really well on the test that they had just taken in their small group, and they were super excited about it. These are kids that never talk about academics outside of academics, so this was a huge thing for them. And the two teachers were really excited about having been a part of that particular situation. And so guess what happened? When those two teachers were talking about it, another teacher asked them, what are you guys talking about? And then it just started to spread, and that's when the snowball happened. And by the end of the school year, everyone was on board. Everyone was fired up about getting our kiddos where we wanted them to be. And it was such a great thing to be a part of and to witness because it truly empowered both the teachers and the students. And the positive vibes from that building were unbelievable. So many great things were accomplished in that particular school, all thanks to having a sound RTI system in place. So what I would like for you to do right now is pause the video so that you can document very quickly the things that you already have going on with RTI in your building. Do you have an RTI team in place? Do you have RTI parameters established for what your system might include? Go ahead and take a few minutes to write those things down, pause the video, and then join back in with me once you have that information down. All right, thank you so much for taking a few moments to reflect upon what you already have in place with RTI. If you had nothing to write down, no worries. We're getting ready to jump into some very specific information about RTI so that we can make sure that when we're finished with the session today, you can totally answer those questions. So let's take a look here. You're going to see the traditional model, that triangle three-tiered model that includes Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Traditionally at Tier 1, this is what every student is receiving. This is your solid core instruction. Roughly 80% of your students are going to fall into that category. Through a data analysis, you will then identify your kiddos that aren't cutting it at Tier 1 that need to be bumped to Tier 2. This is about 5 to 15% of your students that fall into this Tier 2 category. They have been identified as students that are struggling to demonstrate grade level mastery of standards at Tier 1 that need some additional intervention to be provided for them so that we can help get them to where we want them to be. If students at Tier 2 are then identified as struggling students and not really making much progress at Tier 2, we're going to bump them up to Tier 3. This is going to consist of about 5% of your students because this is highly individualized intervention. You're going to identify very specific skills that you're going to be working on with your students at Tier 3 and provide them highly individualized and targeted instruction on a more regular basis. Now let's take a look here. Tier 1 that we talked about before, this is an ongoing cycle. This never ends. From day 1 to day 180. Tier 1 instruction is taking place. This is 80% of your student population, and it includes that high quality classroom instruction with best practices built into every single thing you are doing. Not anything new, it's what you are already doing. You're also going to be providing a periodic screening through your universal screener at Tier 1, because then you're going to conduct a data analysis of the universal screener results so that you can identify your students that need to be moved to Tier 2. At Tier 2, one cycle is typically less than or equal to one grading period. So as a good rule of thumb, it's the research recommends somewhere from 6 to 8 weeks that the students will be participating in a Tier 2 cycle. This is about 15% of your student population. And remember that this is supplemental instruction. This is in addition to what every student is already getting at Tier 1. Regular progress monitoring is still going to continue. Utilizing data-based decision-making as you are coming up with that data analysis, you're going to use the data to help drive your instruction and make those sound educational decisions for your students. At Tier 2, small groups are very common. And if you get to the end of that Tier 2 cycle and you have minimal documented academic progress for that student, it could mean that they are a candidate for Tier 3 support. Typically at the end of a Tier 2 cycle, you have a couple of options. You can either continue the same intervention, that the student just needs a little more time to see how things go so that you can collect some more progress monitoring data points to determine the effectiveness of the intervention. Perhaps the student still needs Tier 2 support, but you need to modify the intervention that is being provided. That would be another option for you. Or perhaps they do need to be bumped to Tier 3, at which point I would encourage you to pull in some additional colleagues so that you can brainstorm what that Tier 3 support looks like. Typically, that's when you're going to pull in that school task force so that you can bring more heads to the table to brainstorm what that very intensive Tier 3 intervention is going to look like for that particular student. If they are moving to Tier 3, one instructional cycle, again, is going to be less than or equal to one grading period. That's 6 to 8 week time period. This, again, is individualized, targeted instruction on those very specific deficit skills that you have identified for this particular student. This is supplemental instruction. This is not they're struggling in reading, so we're pulling them out of reading class to provide them with some intervention. That is not going to get it. This needs to be in addition to what they are getting at grade level. If you have a 5th grade student, teachers, it's your responsibility at Tier 1 to be introducing that student to that grade level material. If he's a 5th grader but he's reading at a 3rd grade level, you know that's going to be a little difficult, and you can address that through differentiation as you are presenting materials to the students in class. During your tier 2 or tier 3 instruction, that is when you're going to back things up to that 3rd grade level and really focus on filling those gaps and those deficit skills. You're going to be conducting regular progress monitoring. A good rule of thumb with progress monitoring is once every 2 weeks. So you want to be collecting those data points throughout that entire cycle so that you can get a true account of student progress from the 1st week of the cycle to, say, the 6th or 7th week of an 8-week cycle, because you're going to utilize that progress monitoring data to make decisions for this student. At the end of tier 3, again, you have options. A lack of documented progress could mean a referral for an educational evaluation so you can get some more information to determine the best next steps for this student. However, simply coming to the end of tier 3 does not mean an automatic referral. You could have the student continue the same intervention for another intervention cycle. You could have them continue another cycle of tier 3 intervention but modify the intervention that is being provided. Or again, you could get everyone together from that RTI task force and determine if a referral for an evaluation is the best next step for that particular student. All right, so let's take a minute to talk about this school task force that I've talked about a little bit. The purpose of the task force, they have a lot of responsibilities in implementing RTI in your particular building. They are not only going to be participating in making the decisions and setting up what that system is going to look like within your building, but they're also going to be talking about how they can pull other teachers on board. That buy-in from their colleagues, that's going to be a big thing that the school task force is already going to be taking part of. So if you're looking to create your own school task force, what do you do first? Well, first you need to decide who you want to participate on this team. If you're an elementary building, I would highly recommend a primary and an intermediate teacher, as well as a special education teacher. I've also seen people including guidance counselors, mental health personnel, a school psychologist if they're available. If you have a high EL population, perhaps the person that is the coordinator for the EL students within your school or your district would also be a good person to consider inviting to be a part of your RTI school task force. The great thing with that is that you have people with so many varied backgrounds that they bring so many fresh ideas to the table. If you're more of a intermediate 5 to 8 or high school 9 to 12, I would make sure that you have individuals represented at the varying grade levels as well as various content area classes. If you have some elective teachers that you think would be great to have if they're just kind of this outside of the box thinker, I would highly recommend involving them in this process as well. Administrators, you're not getting off the hook because you're also playing a part in this RTI school task force. While you may not be in charge of that particular school task force, you must be a part of this so that you are in the know of all of the things that are taking place in your building. What's really great with this school task force is that delegation is huge because now you have more people to delegate these RTI responsibilities to. Let me tell you, RTI implementation is a heavy task. There are many, many things that have to be accomplished in order for implementation to be done and to be done well. One person cannot do all of the implementation when it comes to a brand new RTI system. It's just not possible. So what you're going to do is you're going to identify which teachers are going to be responsible for which parts of the implementation process. Delegate. Determine when things need to be done and reconvene often and keep those lines of communication open so that everybody is on the same page when it comes to moving forward with RTI implementation for your building. And again, coming back to that brainstorming, having more people at the table, more fresh ideas. Sometimes as a classroom teacher, I bring little Johnny to the RTI school task force because I don't know what else to do with little Johnny. I'm working too closely with him. I don't know how else to help him. I need some fresh ideas. That RTI school task force can definitely be that fresh pair of eyes to take a look at the data, give that unbiased opinion about what the data is telling you, because sometimes you're too close to the situation to be able to make that determination. So what I would like for you to do right now is take a few moments to pause the video and start coming up with a list of individuals that you currently work with that you think would be great people to try and recruit for that RTI school task force. Thank you so much. Hopefully you have a nice list of people going already that you can recruit to kind of be a part of this RTI School Task Force. And trust me, your excitement for how great this RTI system can be is definitely going to be the biggest benefit in recruiting these people to be members of this RTI School Task Force as well. So remember to be as positive as possible as you're talking about all of the great things that RTI can do for your students, and that our RTI School Task Force is going to build itself. All right, so when we're talking about selecting interventions now, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. If anything, you're going to have to be more creative with how you are designing interventions for your students. You're no longer going to be able to just say, well, we'll try this. You're going to have to utilize your data in order to determine what is going to work the best for this particular student or small group of students if they have the same like deficit skills. So I want you to utilize what you already have. Intensify your instructional delivery. You can increase the learning time that you're working with those students, or you can reduce that instructional group size. You don't have to spend money buying this program or buying that program or hiring another person to do it. These are all things that you can do. And in doing that, you're not providing more of the same. That is not our goal when it comes to RTI interventions. If they didn't get it the first time, doing it the same way the second time is not going to get it. Let me share this story. I love my mother-in-law. She is the secretary at the 5 through 8 building that I worked in. We have a large EL population of students, and when the students would come into the office and they would talk to her, if they didn't understand what she said the first time, the second time she talked louder and slower to them. Well, guess what? That is not helping anything. It's just like with our RTI kids. Louder and slower is not going to cut it. So you're going to have to be creative with how you're presenting this to your students during that intervention time period. And again, make sure that you're utilizing your data to help you design the perfect interventions for your students. All right, so we're going to kick things up a little bit with Fidelity. Oh man, Fidelity. Some of you may already be moaning and groaning, or your palms might be getting sweaty, because I've often heard of Fidelity as being the other F word. We don't like it. It's difficult. But in order for us to have an effective RTI system in place, Fidelity better become your new best friend. What is Fidelity? Well, when we're thinking in terms of RTI, Fidelity would mean utilizing your RTI components or your RTI curriculum as designed. It would be implementing your RTI system as you have designed it, so that you can make sure that everyone is doing things in the same way. It's creating a plan and sticking to that plan. So let's say that this time next year, you come back together with your RTI School Task Force to determine the effectiveness of your RTI program. Well, if you have some teachers doing things one way, some teachers doing things another way, when you come to analyze that data at the end of your school year, you're not going to be able to compare any of that information. You have apples and you have oranges, and you cannot make a sound educational decision from that information. Everyone needs to be implementing things in the same way. Everyone needs to be providing intervention and documenting that in the same way. People need to be having the same conversations. They need to be utilizing a very common language as they are working through the implementation of RTI. If they are not doing that, you cannot make a decision based upon data. With RTI, we can no longer make decisions based on that teacher gut, that, yeah, I think things are going okay. You need to be able to look at the hard data, look at the numbers, and determine what are the numbers telling me. And the only way that you can actually do that is if you have implemented it with Fidelity. So this goes back to Tier 1, that basic core curriculum. If you have adopted a particular reading series, then your teachers better be utilizing every single component of that reading series. Because if not, they are not utilizing that curriculum with Fidelity. If the teachers are just cherry picking the pieces of the curriculum that they like, at the end of the school year, you're not going to have a true account of how effective that curriculum was, because not everyone was utilizing all of the curriculum components. See the problem there? I know that with my curriculum, I didn't really like the vocabulary piece. So I'd kind of just go over it very briefly, and I didn't really stay true to that curriculum as it was designed. What a huge disservice I did for my kids that year. I really feel really badly that I was not using that curriculum with Fidelity. And so we have to make sure that we are sticking to the plan as it is designed, utilizing all of the components as they were designed so that we can help our students to be as successful as possible. We might not like Fidelity because it makes it a little more difficult for us, but trust me, when it comes to seeing the success for students in RTI and determining what your next steps are as an RTI system, as an RTI task force about your RTI system, you have to stress the importance of Fidelity with your staff members. Okay, so let's talk about Tier 1 specifically now. Remember, at Tier 1, we're providing that solid Tier 1 core instruction for our students. For your struggling students, you've conducted that data analysis, incorporating your anecdotal notes and your observational notes. You can identify the area of need for students based upon that information. You're utilizing your universal screener data and any other additional notes or things that you have observed for that kiddo to determine where you need to start with that particular kid. If the data indicates a deficit skill, you're going to meet with your RTI task force, fill out that Tier 2 form, and initiate your Tier 2 support. What's great with this is that you can meet with that RTI task force so that you can determine the most foundational skill that you are going to be starting with providing your instruction. If you do not start your intervention on that most foundational skill, then what you're going to find is that you have these gaps that you can't build anything upon. If a student is struggling, if they're struggling in phonemic awareness and fluency, you're not going to start intervening with fluency until they have that basis for the phonemic awareness. Otherwise, you're never going to see the gains out of that kid. So you need to make sure that you are very, very intentionally planning for what you are doing with your students at Tier 2. When Tier 2 begins, the classroom teacher is going to implement that Tier 2 intervention, monitoring progress bi-weekly for somewhere between an 8 to 10 week cycle. At Tier 2 then, remember, the classroom teachers implemented this, collecting that progress monitoring data point bi-weekly for a minimum of 4 data points during that 8 to 10 week time period. We come to the end of Tier 2, you're going to meet back with that RTI school task force regarding Tier 2 progress. Here are, again, the options that you have at the end of Tier 2. Number 1, that documented progress has been made, dismiss that kiddo right back to Tier 1. However, that student is never going to fall off of your teacher radar. You're always going to look back through their data when you have a universal screener so that you can make sure that they're not slipping back into those old habits. Option number 2 would be that continued monitoring is necessary, so keep doing that same intervention for just another intervention cycle, collecting additional data points so that you can have a better idea of exactly where that kiddo is when you come to make that next decision at the end of the new cycle. Option number 3 would be that continued monitoring is necessary. So continue that Tier 2 support, but create a new intervention plan for what that cycle is going to look like. Option number 4 would be that you need to get that RTI school task force together because there really wasn't any progress that was made. My data is showing that maybe the student did even worse during that Tier 2 cycle. So you'll meet with the school task force, brainstorm what that Tier 3 intervention will look like, fill out the RTI form there at the Tier 3 meeting, and then you'll work to implement that Tier 3 expectation. Tier 3 is going to begin. That intervention plan is going to be implemented with Fidelity. There's that word again. You're going to again be monitoring progress bi-weekly for a minimum of 4 data points during that 8 to 10 week time period. At the end of Tier 3, you're going to get back with that RTI task force regarding Tier 3 progress, and again, you have some additional options. The first option is that progress has been made. Your data is truly showing you that progress has been made, and you are 100% confident that the student is ready to move back to Tier 2. Option number 2 would be that continued monitoring is necessary. Just continue that same intervention for another cycle. Collect some additional data points, reconvene, and make a decision at the end of another cycle. When we get to options 3 and 4, we're really going to rely back on that RTI task force to make that decision with the classroom teacher. Option number 3 would be that we don't feel like the student is ready to move on to an evaluation. We also don't feel like they're ready for Tier 2. So they're just going to continue tier 3, but we need to make some modifications to that intervention strategy and start over with another tier 3 cycle. Going back to that task force is going to help with that brainstorming process. Option number 4 would be that the task force needs to reconvene so that they can discuss the possibility of a special education evaluation, because minimal progress has been made at tier 3. And the key to that minimal progress is that it is documented. The data is showing that there is little to no progress that has been made during that tier 3 intervention. If you don't feel like you have enough data points, continue the intervention for another cycle until you can collect some additional data points that can help you to feel confident in whatever decision it is that you are making. I will also say that if your intervention cycle is, let's say your intervention cycle ends in December, you know that when the student comes back that first week in January, they're going to participate in another universal screener. What you can do is at the end of that cycle say, okay, I know we have another big universal screener coming up. I'd like to wait to make a decision until I see how the student performs on that universal screener. So you can extend that cycle for 2 weeks until they take the universal screener again, analyze that data point, and utilize that data point with all of the other data points you've collected to make a sound educational decision for your students. Another thing that I want you to be aware of is as you are utilizing your universal screener data, you need to use that data before it becomes autopsy data. Autopsy data, what do you mean by that? Well, it's just that. If you're not going to do anything with the data as soon as you have it, by the time you extend out to 3-4 weeks from that test time, that data is autopsy data. It's not accurate anymore. It is no longer showing where the kiddos are at that particular moment. You have to utilize the data quickly after you have collected that or after the universal screener has been conducted so that you have the most recent information possible as you are designing not only your tier 1 lessons, but your tier 2 and tier 3 interventions and supports. There is nothing more frustrating than spending your time designing this awesome activity for your students only to find that when you sit down at the table to conduct that lesson with them that they already know it because they picked it up last week when you went over it in class, even though the universal screener from 2 weeks prior to that was showing you that they didn't get it. So make sure you're using current, up-to-date data as you are making decisions for your students. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about tier 1 and tier 2 because oftentimes I hear people saying, well, is that tier 1 or is that tier 2? I'm just so confused. Well, that's easy to become confused because they have a lot of things in common. Both include best instructional practices. Those good professional practices that teachers have always utilized are happening in both tiers. Data is also utilized to drive instruction in both tier 1 and tier 2. The goal for both tiers is standards mastery. Even if your student is multiple grade levels below, the overall goal is going to be to demonstrate standard mastery by the end of the school year. Now, for some of our kiddos, that's not going to be very realistic. They're very well not going to go from a 3rd grade reading level to a 5th grade reading level in a short tier 2 cycle. So therefore, it's important that you're setting both short-term and long-term goals at both tier 1 and tier 2 for your students so that we can make sure that we are designing very intentional lessons for our students. You're also going to incorporate checks for understanding in every single thing that you are doing. If you are not doing everything you can to keep your finger on the pulse of where your students are in your classroom, then you really are not utilizing data to help drive your instruction. Checks for understanding can also increase student engagement because you have the students up and moving and they're constantly knowing that your teacher is going to be checking on you and ask you to demonstrate your understanding in one way or another. So that helps with that student engagement for both tier 1 and tier 2. Many teachers are creating both pre and post assessments, not only for their whole group at tier 1, but also for those smaller groups that they have going at tier 2 and tier 3. Teachers, you're constantly communicating with parents as soon as you find a concern that you have for those particular students, and that is not going to change simply because a student is moving to tier 2. You most likely are going to be notifying the parents and letting them know, hey, I see that your student is struggling with A, B, and C. This is what I'm going to be doing to help them demonstrate grade level mastery on these particular concepts, and you'll explain the different supports that you have in place for them through the RTI system. So as we are looking here at Tier 1, well, Tier 1 is great because it includes in-class grades. Of course, you're giving grades to students at Tier 1. That's what we do so that we can notify parents of how their students are doing in class. You also are going to have a larger number of students at Tier 1. Again, Tier 1, curriculum fidelity. You must utilize all of the components within your curriculum in order to implement that curriculum with fidelity. That will help with making those educational decisions about what's going on at Tier 1 that then also transfers over to Tier 2 and Tier 3 and all of the aspects of your RTI system. At Tier 1, there will most likely be an RTI referral form that you can utilize to help kind of map out your initial concern for the student, what the data is telling you, so that you can utilize that to help guide those discussions, while also utilizing a teacher resource guide to help with that. Tier 2, you're typically going to see a smaller number of students. This is something that's not going to be graded. I have seen, however, at both middle school and high school levels where Tier 2 supports are given a pass-fail grade simply because the teachers felt like the students would be more motivated to participate if they knew that they were at least being held accountable to a pass-fail grade on their report card. That is something that each individual school would need to make the decision on based upon the needs of your particular students. Now, you also are going to have data tracking forms at Tier 2 that you're going to need to be filling out so that you can diligently track how students are doing in response to those Tier 2 supports that you are providing for them. The intervention plan that you create for what Tier 2 is going to look like is going to need to be implemented with fidelity as well. Documenting all of this information on that Tier 2 form so that when you are coming to the task force and making a decision, you're able to have all of that data at your fingertips to help make those sound educational decisions for your students. So different factors for you to keep in mind as you are looking to implement RTI in your building. The timely and accurate identification of students has to be happening. What do you already have in place that allows you to analyze the data in a quick timeline after a universal screener has been administered to your students? You also want to make sure that you're providing interventions that work for your students. Do your research. Find interventions that work for your particular demographic of students. If you hear about a really great intervention, but it's going to cost you thousands of dollars and you know that you don't have the money to purchase that particular program, obviously you're not going to be able to utilize that particular program, even if the research shows that this is a fantastic intervention. You have to do what works and what's realistic for your particular group of students. You also need to make sure you've conducted regular progress monitoring with your students. If you're not collecting regular progress monitoring data points for the students that you have at Tier 2 and Tier 3, you're never going to be able to make educational decisions to move students to the appropriate level of support within your RTI system. This has to be conducted on a regular basis. This is something that I will say is something that is very easy to put off to the side. It's easy to just push progress monitoring off to the side because you have so many other things that you need to do. This would be something where I would recommend that you create a schedule. If you know that you conduct your progress monitoring every Tuesday, then hold yourself to doing that every Tuesday. Have a plan, stick to it, find an accountability partner that is going to ask you every Tuesday, have you collected your progress monitoring data points, and stick to that plan until it becomes just a natural part of your routine. You definitely don't want to get to the end of an intervention cycle and be like, oh crap, I forgot to collect those data points. Let me collect these the last 3 days of the cycle. Well, that's not going to give you a true account of how successful or unsuccessful that particular intervention has been. So do yourself a favor, create a schedule for progress monitoring and stick to that. Because once you have those progress monitoring data pieces in place, you're going to be able to make those sound educational decisions for your students. And what I really want you to be able to do is to utilize your RTI data. You have to use the data. If you're going to work so hard to collect these progress monitoring data points, make sure that you're using the data. Make those sound educational decisions based upon what that data is telling you. And remember that better implementation results in the greater success of academic achievement of overall school success for our students. I don't want you to take the implementation piece lightly. Implementation is huge. If people just go through and they cherry pick the things that they really think will work well without thinking through down the road 2 to 3 years what that's going to look like for their students, you're going to find yourself in a mess. Things are going to crumble because you didn't implement things step by step by step. You didn't think through long term what that's going to look like and how you're going to change that practice to be more effective year after year. You cannot just fly by the seat of your pants when it comes to RTI implementation. You must have supports in place so that this program can be successful long term. What I would like for you to do right now is take a few moments to pause. I want you to think about something we've talked about right now that makes you think, oh yes, that's exactly what I needed to hear from this. I want you to write down what that idea is so that you can share that on our Facebook page at the conclusion of our session. All right, thank you so much for taking a moment to reflect on that. I look forward to reading those aha moments, and I'm helping kind of push that idea along so that we can help you get through your RTI implementation piece as well. Okay, so some pitfalls to avoid. Let's talk about the things you don't want to do. Okay, you definitely don't want that spotty screening or that mediocre monitoring of your students' progress. This is something that you're going to want to make a schedule for, just like we talked about during that progress monitoring conversation. Create a schedule, stick to it. I've even heard of other schools that have said that, okay, we're deciding that this week is a progress monitoring week, and they make that announcement for everyone. Everyone is conducting progress monitoring the first and third weeks of every month, and they remind teachers over announcements. There are email reminders so that everybody is on the same page during this initial implementation phase. You also don't want to find yourself with inadequate analysis of data or of how the program is going. With RTI implementation, the one thing that I can guarantee is that you are going to have multiple in-flight corrections. You are going to implement things, and when you reconvene with your RTI task force to kind of evaluate how things are going with implementation, you're going to say, okay, we're doing things this way, but I think if we changed it just a little bit, that this would work a little bit better. As you work those kinks out, you want to make sure that you're conducting an analysis of the program as you're going through that. You also don't want to have poorly planned PD. RTI is not something where you can just say, yep, here we go, this is going to work. I have given you all the information initially and I never need to follow up on it. You must plan follow-up professional development for the people that are going to be in the field making this work. That includes staff members like your teachers, your office staff, your custodians, any paraprofessionals or instructional assistants that are going to be participating in this. They all need to have professional development opportunities. Admin, you cannot be left out of this process. You must be a part of every single part of this particular process. You want to avoid that RTI referral syndrome. You do not simply just want to get in the habit of referring kids, referring kids, referring kids. You want to make sure that you have a sound system in place that's going to allow you to take students through this referral process in an appropriate way so that you can make sure that you have identified the students that you need to and not over-identifying anyone simply because they participated in the RTI process. And the cart before the horse implementation, if you hear that something is going really well in one building, you really don't want to just jump in and implement it simply because you heard that somebody else experienced success with it. You want to make sure that you've thought out every single part of the implementation process. Some keys to success: you want to make sure that you have documented every single thing, down to even the smallest detail. This also, something else to keep in mind is that with solid Tier 1 instruction, you need to make sure that you're differentiating your instruction, that you are conducting a data analysis of all of the data that you have collected, as well as implementing your curriculum components and your plan with Fidelity. Intentional implementation is key. You cannot fly by the seat of your pants when it comes to implementing RTI. And again, remember that this is a school-wide initiative. Everyone's on board, all hands on deck, moving towards the same goal. And that documentation piece is huge. Your basic documentation points are going to include your overall concern, a summary of those Tier 1 supports that you have implemented during that general ed common, that core instruction that every kid is receiving. You also want to include some comparison data. This is going to be where that student is that is struggling in comparison to their grade level peers. This current achievement levels versus the grade level expectation is going to help kind of paint the picture of the deficit that exists for that particular kiddo. You'll want to include your progress monitoring data for both Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports so that you can get a well-rounded account of what has been provided for this particular student and how they have responded to that intervention. The most important data pieces or documentation pieces to go along with this would be your intervention plans for Tier 2 and Tier 3, letting everybody know exactly what you did with those particular students. You will want intervention and data summaries for what you collected at Tier 2 and Tier 3, as well as that comparison data between the student performance level and the grade level expectations for that particular student. Remember, this is going to help paint the picture for exactly what you wanted to accomplish with your students. So Tier 1 is going to provide us with that perfect place to start. This is where that solid foundation is going to be established with your particular students. You are going to keep in mind that you want differentiation to be a big part of what happens at Tier 1. You're going to incorporate those checks for understanding, that student engagement, as well as data-driven instruction so that you know exactly what needs to happen with your students. Fidelity is going to be a big piece of Tier 1 because you want to make sure that you've implemented the curriculum as it was designed. All of those components are going to need to be utilized as they were designed so that you can make sure that the curriculum is implemented with fidelity. This is going to help you make those educational decisions long term. Now let's talk about intentional implementation. You want to make sure that you have fully developed an RTI implementation plan. Remember, this is not the time for you to fly by the seat of your pants when it comes to your implementation plans for your particular building. You want to think through every single thing. You want to make sure that no detail has been overlooked for your particular students. You also want to make sure that your administrators and your task force are collaborating and making these decisions together as you're working through this initial implementation phase. Within your RTI implementation plan, you want to make sure that you have short and long-term goals that you have established and you have thought out with your particular team so that you can make sure that everyone is moving forward on the same path as you work to implement an RTI system within your building. Remember, hope is not a strategy. You must have a plan. And in order for our students to be successful, we have to be extremely intentional with what we are working to implement to help provide them with additional supports within your school. So remember, this is a school-wide initiative, okay? We have to have all hands on deck, no exclusions. Everyone needs to be in the same boat, moving in the same direction, trying to accomplish the same goals. You're also going to need to be creative as everyone is working together, because for some of these kids, we have to have the most outside of the box ideas headed at them, because the first time we provided the instruction, they didn't get it. So we have to make sure that as we work through this, we make sure that we're thinking extremely creative so that we can make sure that we're reaching all of the students and pushing them to grade level mastery. If you are not familiar with the What Works Clearinghouse, this is going to become your new best friend. This is a great, great resource. With the What Works Clearinghouse, you can search for interventions that have worked for students with your same demographic of students. It allows you to search by particular content area. It also allows you to identify multiple demographic features that you would be able to analyze the specific interventions that you're looking to implement to determine if it's one of the best things that you could be utilizing for your students. All right, so what I want you to do now is think about what is in your toolbox. What has worked for you? Think about the strategies that you've implemented in class, the curriculum components that have gone over really well with your students, as well as any kind of online programs or other programs that you've purchased that you feel you have had success in working with struggling learners. You've been doing these things as long as you've been teaching. This toolbox is not RTI specific. These would be those best professional practices that you have implemented day in and day out that have helped your students. So I want you to pause the video, take a moment to reflect upon those particular points, and then go ahead and write down what you have in your toolbox that has worked for you. All right, thank you so much for taking time to reflect on that. I look forward to seeing these varied strategies and curriculum components and programs and resources that you all have experienced success with in the classroom. So now we're going to talk about PGPs. That first option is going to be that you've participated in our Lounge and Learn session. You're going to complete that evaluation, and you're going to get those 2 PGP points. Easy peasy, right? But if you're looking for a little bit more, this is what I want you to do. Option number 2 is where you're going to create your elevator speech. This is going to be 5 PGP points. You're going to think about a 45-second speech of what RTI is in a nutshell. Your audience could be parents that are looking for more information about the RTI system. This elevator speech is going to be something that you're going to be able to give so many times as you work through RTI implementation and having conversations with parents. So that would be the way that you can get your 5 PGP points would be to email that elevator speech to get those 5 PGP points. If you have not done so already, please feel free to like us on Facebook, that is Encompassing Ed, for amazing tips and tools that can help you with all things education related. We also have just started up, I have started an RTI Tip Tuesday, where every Tuesday I'm coming to you with some tips on how you can move forward with RTI implementation in your particular building. Please join us for our upcoming sessions. We have multiple sessions coming up in the month of May with various options for you. Not only do we offer beginning and intermediate and advanced sessions to help kind of individualize and differentiate our instruction, but we also have things coming to you from not only RTI, but we have mental health, we have positive behavior supports. We just have a lot of different sessions that are available through our Lounge and Learn format. All of these sessions are 1-hour sessions, and again, that bite-sized information coming straight to you from anywhere that you choose. As long as you can hook into Wi-Fi, you can join us for a Lounge and Learn sessions. Group discounts are available, and feel free to follow us on Twitter at McKinley Diane for all Lounge and Learn updates, as well as all encompassing education updates, and visit our webpage at encompassinged.com. That's encompassinged.com. Thank you so much for tuning in with me for this session on RTI. Hopefully you are leaving with more information than you had when you started. I really appreciate your participation this evening. Feel free to visit us on Facebook or our webpage or on Twitter so that you can find out about all of the sessions that are coming up on Lounge and Learn. I personally am going to be presenting a session in May on RTI at the secondary level. If you are a secondary teacher and you're watching this right now, you're probably shaking your head thinking, oh my gosh, I need more information. There's not a lot of research that exists on how to implement RTI at the secondary level. So I am very excited to be bringing that to you for the month of May. So visit our website. My first session for that is going to be on May 3rd. So I would love for you to join me with that session that evening. If you have some suggestions of any additional sessions that you would like to see presented in our Lounge and Learn format, please feel free to include that in your end of the session survey. And we always like to hear those suggestions so that we know the direction that we need to go with our sessions based upon that feedback that we have from our Lounge and Learners. So we also have an email list that you can sign up to be a part of, and we would, as always, love to have your participation in all things we have going on with our Facebook Facebook group. So thank you so much for your participation tonight. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at tiffany@encompassingeducation.com, and I would be more than happy to get back to you. Don't forget to go to our Facebook page so that you can be responding after this free session with all of the prompts that you stopped for during the session and adding those responses to the Facebook page. I look forward to reading all of those and responding back to you to help kind of give you some guidance as to what your next steps might be. Thank you so much, guys. Hope to see you back for another Lounge and Learn session. Have a great night.